Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is 𝙨𝙗𝙗 if you're new, and I make videos every week that document my self-growth journey. I am so excited for today's video, honestly, because I have been wanting to talk about this for so many years. Ever since I first had these experiences, I truly just wanted to shout about them from the rooftops, from the mountaintops, whatever you want. I just wanted everyone to know. But I didn't ever felt like the time was right because I was worried about being judged. I didn't think people were going to be receptive to it. I didn't want it affecting the way people acted towards me. There was a whole bunch of ego-related things that I was worried about. But now, in the present moment, circumstances have shifted and I feel ready. I feel ready to share my experiences with you. Finally! So before I start, I just want to let you know that I am sharing my experiences for educational purposes. I in no way encourage anyone to take any mind-altering substances without doing their proper research first. These are not to be taken lightly, and you really need to make sure that you know what you're getting yourself into before you go in too deep, If you're completely new to this world, this is the first time you're hearing about anything like this, anything about psychedelic drugs in general, this is a great place to start because I will be giving you my general experience with them. If you are interested and you feel called to it, then I highly recommend, like I said, doing some more research and making sure that this is really what you want to get yourself into before you just go and find some and consume them and have the experience. But basically, today I'm going to be talking about psilocybin mushrooms because that is what most of my experience with psychedelics is in. So psilocybin mushrooms are a type of mushroom that contain the compound psilocybin. And when ingested by human beings, it results in an experience that is very hallucinogenic, it's reality altering, it changes your perceptions of the world, it changes the way you visually perceive things, it changes the way your mind works and ways you process information, basically is what it is. And it's a psychedelic experience. These plants, these are mushrooms, they grow naturally in nature. You can find different varieties of them all over the world. And what's cool about them is that they have been used by human beings for generations. We have found evidence from all around the world, different ancient civilizations that have documented the use of psychedelic compounds, such as magic mushrooms. And this is not the first time that human beings are starting to use them, they had been used in the past by different cultures. And then in our current society, they became illegal for whatever reasons. There's a lot that you can read up about that, why it's illegal, why it's classified as such dangerous and harmful substances, even though they're not. That's a whole other thing. You can look into it yourself. This is not the video for that. I might talk about it in another video, but for now, I'm just gonna be talking about my personal experiences. Anyway, where was I? This is such a big topic that I'm I really wanna make sure that I get everything, but to be honest, it's fine. If I miss anything, I can always make another video, so we're good. Anyway, that's me calming myself down. So, where were we? Garrett and I, when we first started to explore these drugs, obviously what we had known about them before was that they were very harmful because the government has classified them as illegal class 1. Basically the class of substances that are most dangerous and have no medicinal uses whatsoever. Because of that classification, in our minds, we had been fed this information that these psychedelic compounds were pretty much on the same level as heroin or cocaine or just really hard drugs that have been shown to be degenerative on the human body and on our physical beings. So we were very cautious when we first heard about this because we were just told that it was probably one of the hardest drugs ever and that be aware and don't go near them, and etc. But how did we even come across them? We came across them through the magical world of YouTube. Garrett and I have always been a really big watchers of YouTube. The internet is where we get a lot of our information, where we conduct a lot of our research. And I don't know who came across it first, but the two YouTube channels that really introduced us to the concept and the world of psychedelic experiences were Your Mate Tom and Psych Substance. So when this happened, when we first started learning about it, we were in second year of university in 2017, and at the time we had already had a lot of experience with marijuana. So we were already comfortable with altered states of consciousness, and it was something that intrigued us a lot, especially me. I was like, what the heck? Because obviously, like, growing up in Islam and growing up in the culture, in Pakistani South Asian culture, mind-altering substances are like a big no. Like, you're not even allowed to drink alcohol because it's sinful. So that's the culture I grew up in, and I guess part of the rejection process of the rigidity of organized religion and strict cultural rules, I really felt inclined to explore this world. And so we started watching a lot of videos, and we started watching a lot of trip reports, just like this one. We just kind of were like, this sounds really cool, let's look into it. You can't really buy magic mushrooms in the store in Canada. They are legal in places like Amsterdam, but in Toronto and in Kingston, where we were staying at the time, they were not very easy to find. But we were on a university campus, and so we just asked around and we found some. And when we first tried it, we were really like, because when you read about these things, you can't really know, like, I can describe to you what the experience is like, but you will have no idea what it's like until you're actually experiencing it. It's very different than alcohol. It's very different than weed. I cannot compare it to any other regular, like, more mainstream experiences. So anyway, we did our research. We understood the proper procedures. I made sure that I had my intention ready, because one of the things that people recommend is that have an intention for your trip, a concept or idea or a purpose of the trip that you can return to if any time during the trip when you kind of feel like you're kind of falling off, or like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, there's this concept of bad trips, and bad trips, basically, I've never had a bad trip, but I think people have bad trips is because, especially with magic mushrooms, it's putting your mind in places that you may not want to be in. Like, it brings up thoughts that maybe you have been suppressing for a long time. Like, it brings up memories, and it brings up thoughts that you perhaps in your sober life are not wanting to confront. If you are not ready to heal yourself, and you're not ready to confront those thoughts, and your egoic self is too strong, and you're not ready to let go, that can result in a bad trip, because you feel like you're losing control. Because you are kind of losing control, you know, like, you're not, when you're on a substance like this, you are not really able to, depends on what dose you take. If you take a lower dose, you are 100% in control of what's happening, which is why if you do this, I highly recommend starting off with a very low dose and then building up, because going too deep with too high of doses can actually result in like PTSD type symptoms and things like that. So you got to tread carefully. But anyway, I never had any because I went into the experiences knowing what I wanted from them. I knew that I was educated on the fact that this process was a healing process. It was to be used for therapeutic purposes. We used them the first time. We didn't use them at the same time because we were responsible, and one of us was tripping while the other person was sober. And so this is like the concept of a trip sitter, like have someone sober that is rooted in our current reality that can kind of deal with things if anything arises. So that is what the advice we followed. And so when I was doing it, I took 2 grams, and Garrett was sober when this was happening. When you first take these substances, and even in subsequent subsequent experiences, there is a feeling of like kind of anxious anticipation because you have no idea where the trip is going to lead you until you're in it. So there's no way to predict. There might be some trips where you're completely like in the light. There's no darkness that you're really exploring, nothing like that. But in other trips, you could be in the darkness and you're gonna have to navigate through it. So you don't really know what you're signing up for until you're in it, which is why there can be this feeling of like scaredness, you know? But that was how I was feeling for the first time. However, deep within me, deep within my soul, I felt like this was exactly what I needed. And to give you some more context, this was back in 2017. This was in March of 2017, actually, my second year of university, second semester. So you remember my story time video of when I told my parents about Garrett? That happened in October of 2016. And so this is like a couple months later in March of 2017. And I was just kind of grappling with this experience that I had experienced. Like, it was so traumatic for me, like I shared in those videos. And it was a really, really rough time. I was depressed, I was confused, I was hopeless because I was in a position where I was basically engaging in an act that, being in a relationship with Garrett, in an act that my family was very against. And that process of getting an ultimatum from my parents being like, either break up with Garrett or leave the house, it really shook things up for me because it changed the relationship between me and my family forever. And so this was like a couple months, so the experience was very fresh at this time. I was, like I said, hopeless. I could not see how this was going to get better. I had no idea. I was like, this is never going to get better. I'm never going to feel happy again. And I am just going to feel suffering and I'm going to feel pain forever. And I was getting into thoughts of like, what is the point? Like, that is kind of the mindset that I was in. Like, what is the point of living right now? Like, that was the closest I would say that I've gotten to being suicidal, because I just didn't see the purpose. I was like, well, if my life's gonna be really, really terrible, if I'm just gonna be suffering for the rest of my life, if I'm gonna be feeling pain, what is even the point? You know, like, why don't I just end it now? And that's where I was when I first took this compound of psilocybin. Anyway, so despite being back to that moment where I took it, I was super scared. But I think Garrett had done it before me and he was fine, he was normal, like he had come back to Earth and he'd gone through the experience and he was unharmed. So I felt more confident about it. And at the same time, there was this deep, deep feeling within me that kept telling me that this is something that I really needed to do. And I couldn't deny that. So I just did it. What we did was we had dried mushrooms. I had 2 grams. And I drank it with, we grinded it up in like a food processor or something. And then I mixed it with orange juice. And I think before that, I didn't eat anything. It was on an empty stomach just so I could truly feel the effects. And yeah, I did feel the effects. Sorry. I'm just trying to remember. It was such a long time ago and I haven't really revisited. But, I mean, I have, but in pieces. Never really retelling the story like I am now. But basically, I had nothing to do that day. We had planned so that we didn't have any commitments that day or the day after, just so we could have the experience and then have all the next day after that to really like integrate it and to kind of come back to alignment in the present moment. So I took it and then I waited. As soon as you take it, there's like this placebo effect that hits where you just like all of a sudden, like literally like 5 seconds after you ingest it, you start feeling like things are like weird. But obviously I don't think it hits that fast. I think it's just your mind like excited and like trying to see what's happening. But the true effects probably hit like an hour and a half in. And they started off for me with visual effects. So my vision, all of the colors became like more vibrant. I remember there being a very pinkish hue in my vision. So the walls weren't really white, but they were pink. And then if we looked at the closet, or if I looked at the floor, it was kind of like wavy, as if things were very like flowy. And the closet as well, it felt like it was like breathing. It was just, I think a misconception with psychedelic drugs is that when you take them, you start seeing things that aren't really there. That has not been the case for me. I mean, I've never really done a really, really high dose, but I think the highest dose I've done is like 3 grams or 3.5 grams of psilocybin mushrooms. And even on all those experiences, you don't really see anything that's not there. What you do see is things that are there, but they kind of like misbehave. Like that was a good way to describe it. But they're like waving around, they're moving in ways that they normally don't. It's just kind of, it's off. It's not your regular experience with your vision. So that was the beginning of it. And then I remember I was lying in bed and I was just like really relaxed and just waiting for things to happen. And I just started tearing up. Like I was like, there was a lot of water welling up in my eyes. And this is when the real effects, like the real positive experience started happening. And this is when I felt like there was an actual presence, like kind of like how you would describe like a spiritual guide or something like that. A lot of people describe psilocybin mushrooms to kind of be like a very feminine, like Mother Nature-y type goddess energy. That's the best way I can describe it as well. It was very motherly. It felt like it was a entity that was speaking through me. I did not see that entity, but I felt it, and I felt her, and I was communicating. But obviously, it wasn't through how like auditory senses. It was like kind of like telepathically, like thoughts were being put into my mind, and so. The best way I could describe it, even at the time, I remember saying to Garrett that I was getting information downloads. And that's what it felt like. It felt like I was just sitting there and information was being downloaded into my brain. And it wasn't really a full sentence type thing. It was just information. And I remember in the moment when I was tearing up and crying, there was a point where I was just nodding my head, because I felt like I was listening to this entity speak to me, and I kept repeating, I understand, I understand. And another thing that happens when you're on these compounds is that you feel very like euphoric. You feel very like there's a childlike wonder that you feel about the world around you. You look outside the window and you're just so in awe at the trees, and you're so in awe at all the colors and the fact that there's people walking outside and there's squirrels, and you're just so happy because you feel like wherever you are is like the most magical thing ever, and you feel so appreciative for it. And when I was having this experience, that's like I was in a very euphoric state. Plus I had this entity that was talking me through all of my anxieties that I was facing. Like I was saying before, I was in a very suicidal state, not a very suicidal state, but I was in the most suicidal state that I've ever been in. I was super depressed, super hopeless. I didn't see the point of life. And I also, at this point, had just kind of broken out of organized religion, and I in the past had these really strong beliefs about what reality is and how it worked. And I had this concept of God, and God was always there to take care of me and things like that. And then I rejected all of that and kind of started moving towards like an atheistic approach of spirituality. Like there is nothing, that we are just randomly floating. This was my perception. You may have a different perception of atheism, but what I mean by saying I was moving towards an atheistic perspective was that I was just feeling like we were all alone in the universe, and that there was no purpose for anything, there was no meaning, and that there could be no meaning, But on the substance, I had a very clear entity outside of myself, a very clear presence that I felt that made me feel like I wasn't alone. And it basically, what she was doing was she was going through all of the anxieties that I was worried, like everything that I was worried about basically. So things related to my family, things related to school, like things related to me not feeling good enough, what was going to happen in the future with my family now that I committed such an ultimate crime against them, and that they hated me, and all of these things, like these really, really, really heavy weights that were in my head in the form of negative thought patterns and things like that. The entity, the presence, she was bringing each of them to the surface. We were looking at them together, and she was giving me information downloads, working through them and explaining to me why they weren't actually a big deal and why I didn't have to worry about them. And I can't really say that it was in sentence format, like I can't regurgitate exactly what I was told, but like I said, I was understanding it. I was integrating and embodying it at kind of like an energetic level, the information that I was getting. And it was crazy. I was just crying and tearing up because I felt like with every like passing minute and more of the darkness that was like flooding my heart, and my soul was like leaking out of me. Not actually leaking out, but actually being taken out in a very gentle way. And then I remember getting up, I had to go to the bathroom. And so I walked to the bathroom. I remember the hallway to the bathroom, it was like, like a regular hallway. And it was like so wavy. It was hard to walk because everything was like very wavy. And I was like, oh my God, I felt very unstable in that moment. But I made it to the bathroom. I sat on the toilet and I looked out the window and I was peeing. And there was a tree there. And you know how people always talk about talking to trees on, especially mushrooms? It's a thing. And it was a thing for me. I looked out on the window and there was this tree. And like that entity that was guiding me through all of my anxieties and my worries and talking to me through my thoughts, and the tree was also able to talk to me through my thoughts. And I remember her or him or it or whatever, I don't know, there's no gender, but they, I guess, because there was two of them, they were saying that they were so happy that I was on, this is what they said, at the time I had no concept of any spiritual terms, I was not immersed in that world at all, but spiritual people always talk about frequencies and vibrations and things like that. The tree said to me then, we are so happy and excited and shocked that you can understand us, that you are on the same frequency as us, that you are here. We are so happy. It was totally normal in that experience. I was like, yeah, I'm talking to a tree. That's what it is, talking to a tree. And then they switched to saying oh, but we're so sad that you can't stay here. A lot of you, meaning humans, if you were here more often, you would understand us and know how to take care of us better. And I cry, tear up when I remember that experience, because say what you want about these kind of drugs, but to me it's real because it feels real. And if you experience it, you'll know what I mean. It feels more real than real sometimes because of the intense emotions that come up. But basically that's what they said, that they wish that we could come and speak to them on this level more often because they wouldn't be hurting as bad because of us and what we do to them. So I was talking to the trees for a while I was in the bathroom. I remember I couldn't even really explain this to people before because I was so confused and I felt crazy. And I mean, I guess it is kind of crazy because it's not the norm, but it's an experience that I had that feels just as real as the experience that I'm having now talking to a camera. This experience is just as real as the experience that I had talking to the trees. And honestly, ever since that experience, I have been able to feel the presence of trees and have a better relationship with them because they had previously talked to me, and I kind of, I guess, learned how to tune in to them. They don't always talk to me. They don't always telepathically deliver messages to my head, but I feel them more than I felt them before. Anyway, so I chatted with them for a while, and then I said to them that don't worry, I will come back here. This is temporary for now, but I will be back. And so I said my goodbyes, went back to the bed, and